Hello, friends. Welcome to the Deep Dive. My name is Nick.
Are we on NPR this week? What is
I don't know. I just felt like switching it up for fun.
There you go. All right.
My name is Nick.
I'm Dave.
This is the Deep Dive, classic, like we normally do. I didn't want to have any fun today. I see Dave. No, I'm just joking. But anyway, we're here. We started a new sermon series for kind of, I guess, the summer is kind of what we're hitting. It's called Storyteller, where we're kind of hitting on some of the popular and maybe some not popular parables that Jesus taught.
I'm going to try to work in a couple of not so well-known parables.
Okay.
Well, we're starting off, I will say, the first 2 weeks with probably the two most popular.
Right.
One of which we'll talk about today.
We're talking about the Good Samaritan today in that parable. So I'm excited to get into it. It's always fun to start something fresh. So are you ready?
I am ready. Let's do it.
Let's do this. All right, Dave. So just for some pre-show banter or whatever, what do you got going on this week? Anything?
Well, Vacation Bible School starts in the morning.
That's right. We are recording this on Sunday. VBS is tomorrow.
But it is different for me this year because I will not be here the whole week. I am leaving, going to Athens for our North Georgia United Methodist Annual Conference. And I'm excited about that. I am. I sometimes have mixed feelings about conference. I always love seeing all my friends and stuff. But I'm really excited about all of it this year. So I'll be going over Wednesday afternoon after VBS. And so that's what I got going on.
So you got a crazy week coming up is what you're saying.
Yeah, but I like having crazy weeks.
Yeah. I'm excited about VBS. We get to tag team a little bit with the 4th and 5th graders again, and
we had so many volunteers. We have so many adult leaders in our group.
We really do.
Yeah.
So I think is
that because of the size of the group we have?
Probably because they didn't want to leave us alone.
They got word from last year.
Yeah, we got 28 kids, I think, and I think some of it was just that's where people volunteered, like wanted to be in, so they tried to accommodate that as much.
So let's go.
And we go off site, so it's nice to have a few extra sets of eyes. But
yeah, that's for sure.
Well, Dave, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the Good Samaritan.
Well, let's start first of all with storytelling.
Yeah.
Storytelling is actually a good word for parables. I mean, to say that because stories are so powerful. Lots of times we think of movies and the stories that are there, or someone who is just telling something that happened to them, but they're a really good storyteller.
Yeah.
And it can really engage us.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the art that Jesus is using there. But I also aware of how stories can, they can make us laugh or cry, or they can convict us. They can change us. We can be changed by stories.
Yeah.
And so I think it's there's no wonder that Jesus. It was also sort of a rabbinical style. Rabbis are known for telling stories, but Jesus is a great storyteller and told some of the most profound stories. I mean, stories that like the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son. Everyone inside and out church knows those stories.
Yeah, and you mentioned during the sermon a little bit that everybody kind of knows Samaritan and they think of it fondly. And I was thinking about that, is that there's actually quite a few Christian references that people just use in their common language that they might not even attribute it to it, but it comes from these stories.
I would say with the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son, in and outside the church.
Yeah.
If people said, hey, there's a Good Samaritan law now.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right? You're supposed to. So I would say it's become really part of our vernacular.
Yep.
To use those words. But that is a good place. Well, let me start back and we'll get into the word Samaritan in a second. But I spent some time on it, and I do think it's important to realize the context of when Jesus told this story.
Yeah.
It says that a young lawyer, a young teacher of the law, someone who was an expert in the Old Testament Torah and all that, stood up to test Jesus. We're told that, and so it's important to the story. He has an ulterior motive in asking Jesus this question. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Yeah. So my question is to you, have you ever, I'm sure you have, it's a common human experience. If you ever had someone ask you a question or engage you in a conversation and you knew they were just trying to see if you passed the litmus test, to try to discern how you vote, what you believe about a certain issue.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah, I don't know that I there's not stories necessarily that bubble up, but it's happened quite a bit. I mean, just over time, even that when somebody will be like, "Do you know what this means?" And you're like, "Yeah," and they'll go, "What?" You know what I mean? Like, to just try to kind of give you that test of, like, are you saying what you actually mean or whatever? So, like I said, I don't have like a story I think that I can come up with right off the top of my head. But,
I had it happen to me recently.
oh yeah.
This week, but that's as much as I'll say about it.
Sure.
But it was somebody, not from this church, but somebody that I knew they just wanted to, it wasn't going to change what they thought, but they just wanted to know how I thought.
Yeah.
It's good. And the way Jesus responds, I think is something we can learn from that. I think it always, if someone's asking you a question, you think they might, because sometimes I think people do engage in those kind of conversations because they really want to know how you believe and how you feel. There's a curiosity there, to use the Ted Lasso thing.
Yes.
They're curious. Why do you believe that way? I kind of think you might. So why? Because, it's different than the way I believe. I love that.
Yeah, I love conversation that comes out of that way instead of kind of this maybe not manipulative is not the right word, but this skirting around hey, I really want to ask you this without asking you this.
But I have been baited by people before that as soon as I gave my response or we got into it, I knew that that's what I thought, and you're dead to me.
Yeah.
You're written off. Church members who would never hear another thing I ever said because I had a particular view.
Sure.
And that feels pretty crappy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Jesus' way that he responds, first of all, by asking the question back to the young lawyer, says, "What do you think about it?" And he says, of course, well, you're to love your Lord, your God, with all your heart, soul, and mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
It's classic. Everybody can agree with that.
Yeah.
And that is the classic answer because that's, the Jewish Shema. That's what everybody there would have agreed on.
Right.
But how we do it, how we love, who is our neighbor, that's a much more difficult question and much more hard to put into practice. So Jesus, tells a story to show how we are to love folks. Right. Not just in a region, not next door, not just people that are just like us.
Yep.
But to love everyone. So he tells a story of a good Samaritan, and what you were alluding to about that word Samaritan, it is now a good word.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for us to, I think, get into the context of that. Is that we'd have to think about the most extreme groups now who hate each other, because the group that he is preaching to or teaching to, Samaritan, would there be so much hatred and disdain from that? I use the example of Israelis and Hamas. I mean, these people hated each other, saw no good. It was the other was vilified.
Yep.
And so Jesus uses that word Samaritan to teach them, that there's good in everybody, and that, someone who shows love to another is our neighbor.
Yeah. So if you're out there listening, it's kind of like insert hated group here. You know what I mean? It's kind of to give you a similar context.
And people do that. But I think that's real. It gets easier and easier.
Yeah.
Because we're so polarized. And that was, one point that I kind of drilled down on. We are so polarized. And the other group, is, we can't imagine them being good. And we dehumanize them when we do that.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time thinking Jesus would ever do that.
Yeah, I would be very interested to see Jesus interacting in our culture today, especially with the social media and stuff like that. Like, if it would even be a thing in his world, or if he would just avoid it, just because, you find so many groupings in spaces like that, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I would be interested.
And so he tells a story. he doesn't really answer the question. He tells a story, and it illustrates that. He could have told them, he could have given him the words, but it's so much more powerful as a story because you have to reach that conclusion. Mm-hmm. Because if he said, well, it's everybody, including Samaritans, if that was just a one-sentence answer, then you can imagine, well, no, the Samaritans are heretics. They're this way, And instead, he showed the story, or told the story of this Samaritan who did a great thing, who showed great love, who's called good, who changed the word Samaritan forever,
for all of us.
for all time. And so, I don't think I think everybody watching this podcast, everybody in the sanctuary, unless they were less than 5 years old, probably knew this story.
Sure.
And could have told it themselves. But, he sets it up by using two of the most revered groups in that culture, the priests and the Levites. And, there's this guy dying on the side of the road. He's been beaten up, and they don't stop. They pass by. Yeah. And then he tells a story of the Samaritan. And so I think, from the onset, I think one of the things that we can take away from the parable, and, as I said, it's an easy parable to tell. And it's love. And we can all find ourselves as a good place in the story. But when it comes right down to where the rubber meets the road, it's a very hard thing to live out. Yeah. And so, the two questions that I asked today that I think are important, to the point that I said take a screenshot of it, because I do think it's something we have to think about all the time, is, are we going to be known as followers of Jesus? Are we going to be known for the people that we hate or how we love? Yeah. And we say, well, of course we want to be known by love, but are we really doing that? Because the church, particularly, the surveys, I mentioned a survey a couple of weeks ago, but, the surveys of what people think about church people that are outside the church, they don't think necessarily about the good things that we do. They think about the groups that we exclude, about how we hate, about how we are more polarizing politically than maybe any other one group, So, what do we do about that? How can we do better?
Man,
I mean, do you agree? First of all,
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. At least I can totally understand where people are coming from. I think from the Christian side, you probably have a little bit of a hardship. Is like, well, how do you stand for what you believe if you don't agree with what somebody's doing? Because not everything is hate either. So I think there might be some definitions that could be skewed there, because I think, as you mentioned it, because we're so divided, everything that seems like it's not 100% for means it's 100% against in people's concept.
Yeah, because we're not listening to one another's story.
Exactly.
And I don't care what side you stand on. Right. Everybody does it, and we double down, and we kind of prepare ourselves, which was the second one. Everybody will say they hate that. Yeah. I mean, I hate it. I hate how you can't even watch the news without like some super slant, depending on what news station. And just like, really, how do we do better with that? And, I watched a podcast actually, and then that got me, looking at some other stuff that was out there on the internet this week. Interwebs. But about polarization dynamics and what they really are. And it was asking the question, because everybody's sick of it, is how do we do better with that? Yeah. And the point that it was driving is, first of all, I think it begins with us as individuals. Yeah. I mean, we can't change the other people. We can only change ourselves. And to realize how we are so driven by it, and how we may think, well, this is outside of us. I really do love other people. I really do care what other people think. But are our actions really demonstrating that? Yeah. And are we doing things to feed into that? And so the question was, and I'll read it exactly the way it was in the sermon. You said, does our anger at the other side help create the very things we're angry about? Is it creating more polarization? And is it creating the extremism that we have in our country? Is it causing people to be more extreme? And the point that this was making is that like if we're being controlled by that, if we're being led by that, if we're, and it's hard these days. You mentioned social media, the algorithms that are feeding all that. And we all have our favorite news sources and our favorite, bloggers and our favorite podcasters. But is that just making us more extreme?
Yeah.
And, Lisa's podcaster said, yeah, it is. And so that is not bridging the gulf and it's never going to, the only solution that we can come from that is we've got to defeat the other side. We got to smash the other side.
Yeah.
That's war.
Right.
And I have a hard time seeing Jesus in that. I do. I don't think that the way that we get our message out is by destroying the other.
Yeah. And I think too, on the flip side of that is you don't have to, like, no matter what is being defined of the group you feel like you're with, you can also choose to live your life in a correct way and know and be satisfied in that. You know what I mean? Like, I think in some ways I've been very discouraged in the past when I hear Christians acting a certain way or preachers doing a certain thing or saying something, you know what I mean? Like, I'll get like personally discouraged, but then I have to remember, like, it's my personal walk with Christ.
Yeah.
And that I need to live it out the best way I see. So, like, as long as my audience of him is seeing what I'm doing as loving and like, that's what I'm trying to help drive me. Because I think, like, as I look at the way I love is, like, I feel like I'm a pretty loving guy. I think like I'm a pretty tolerant guy. But there are some things where I feel like God may ask me to step up and it might not be popular amongst everybody I'm with. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm trying to find my contentment in my following of Christ.
Right.
Does it make sense?
Sure.
Instead of getting involved in any grouping or.
Yeah. And I think the people whom I love the most are the very same people that can say the most corrective thing to me.
Yeah.
And it may hurt my feelings. It might, I might take, this sort of natural response of offense to it. But I know they love me.
And it takes that relationship.
And the relationship is more important than that. So we can
you can disagree on things in healthy ways. I think is, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And I think that's what we have to find when it comes to this polarization. I know that's not what all this is we're talking about, so we probably should get back. But at the end of the day is, like, you can be defined by what the other people tell you your groups are, or you can love the way Jesus is asking you to. And, like, to be in somebody's life, like, I would trust if you were to tell me something, because we've got that relationship and rapport built up now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you say, I might not 100% agree with everything you say, but I will listen to it better than if you were to come to me out of the blue and say the exact same thing, because then I'd be like, who's this guy? You know what I mean? So I think with some of that relationship, I think
would it be fair to say that I'm hesitant to say this, but, like, there's some people in the church that you can count on complaining about things all the time. Mm-hmm. There are other people that might complain about something, but they're also saying a lot of good things. So who I'm more likely to hear is not the person who's like, they're going to be mad about everything.
Right.
Or is that person with whom I have a relationship, who has also been very supportive and affirming of other things we've done, who said, hey, this bothered me, or, we didn't like this, or, you need to do this, or whatever. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And for the record, that's not to say, please don't tell us if you've got complaints or anything, but that's more of just, you're going to be heard when you feel like you're in the fight with the people together, that you're looking out for the best interest of all of it, as opposed to just
Well, and I don't want to get back down this bogged down on this one point, because it is just part of what we get out of the parable. But I do think it's important to set the context.
Sure.
Because we do have the Israelites and the Samaritans, maybe more so than ever.
Yeah.
And so Jesus does tell this parable, which we all know. And one of the things that I suggested to people is like, we really need to dive into those characters and put ourselves into each one of those roles. And I think when we do that, we begin to see the different perspectives and maybe kind of understand the motivation there and learn the lesson. And so I use the example of actors who are really good actors. They will think about the character that they're playing, and they'll have the whole backstory in their mind, things that are not in the script that they've written down, so they understand their motivation within that. And I think that does help us get into it. So you've got the priest and the Levite, who were the church people there, the people that you would have expected to stop.
Yeah, the first ones you would think.
And, we can beat up and tell stories about that, but, like, why wouldn't we stop? If we're playing that character, what would be our motivation for not stopping? And I can think of a couple of things. One is that we really, truly had something that was urgent, a sick child, an ailing parent.
Right.
But there's this other side that could be in that character is victim blaming. We see somebody, we know what the Torah has said.
Yeah.
And yet we've chosen to let them, and that, if I'm getting into that character, that's where I find myself a lot, because I think I have a tendency to victim blame, particularly when I see people in those kind of dying on the side of the road. What do they do to do that for them? I don't want to sully my hands with that. And I'm just being honest here.
That's fair.
I would like to think if it was a really urgent thing that I would do better. But if I'm being honest, I have been in situations where I walked past things because I blamed the victim.
Yeah.
I
think that is kind of a human tendency, especially now. I don't think it's necessarily from us being malicious, but more of like, the busy ones. Me, it's like, sometimes I'll get very blinders on that and just keep walking by. But I have been in those others. I'll be vulnerable as well. Like, how many people have I walked by because they're homeless and been like, I don't have anything for them, but they should be doing this or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
right? Or they're just looking for a handout. Or that's the really homeless people. They're not the ones that are on the street corners with the signs. I've done all of that. And I think that can jade our hearts.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think there's some wisdom and discernment that goes into all of that. For some places it might not be safe for someone to.
Right.
But at the same time, it is something that sort of begs, what is the highest priority here?
Yeah.
Right. We started with this question, how do we inherit eternal life? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. So if that's the highest priority, then maybe these other things need to take sort of a second role to that.
Yeah.
I quoted John Wesley on the 3 simple rules. Do no harm, do good, stay in love with God.
Yep.
So do no harm. So I see this person. Am I going to cause more harm by walking past this person?
Yeah.
Nowadays we can call 911 or do that. But truly, if I'm in that situation, am I going to cause more harm? And that was a question that I threw out to the congregation this morning was, or an observation I threw out, is that I think the priest and the Levite, they were asking the question, how would this affect me personally? And I think the Samaritan is reversing the question and saying, how is that going to affect him? And I think that's what Jesus would call us in the story, is that we need to be asked the question, how is this going to affect that other person? Is it going to cause that other person's harm for us to pass by?
Right.
And, it's hard, and we're talking in kind of a theoretical thing with this parable.
Generalities, yeah.
But it doesn't take too long for us to connect it to real life.
Yeah.
In real situations that we have.
Yeah, I think these opportunities present themselves in a lot of our lives, in a lot of our days, and it might not necessarily be somebody beaten up on the side of a road. It could be the simple of, somebody having a really bad day and, well, do I want to get into an hour-long conversation with them about their life because I'm busy and I'm over here doing this, or do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of ways this could play out in our common day.
Well, and that is the genius of this story.
Yeah.
Because this is not a literal thing that happened.
Right.
This is a story to teach us how God is like and how we should follow God.
Yep.
So that's the purpose. So Wade, the character is very, it's very malleable how the characters and so what we better not do though is make it where we always end up being the good guy in the story. And it's, it's the hypocritical Pharisees that are passing by. We can find ourselves in each position of the story, including the man who gets beat up.
Yeah.
And so another question I asked was like, when you are in a vulnerable spot, who is the person or the group of people that they disgust you? You're angry at them, the other, that when you're in a vulnerable position, that is the last person in the world that you want coming to help you.
Yeah.
Because I think that says something about us too.
Mm-hmm.
I heard somebody talk about one time. It's like the man is laying there on the ditch and he sees the Samaritans coming. Oh, feeling much better now.
Great.
But that it's like I don't because he had to kind of go through his same kind of junk that he had too. It's like because I think if I saw somebody who was on the other side of me politically or theologically or whatever coming towards me, I'm going to wonder, well, they've got ulterior motives, or they're just trying to make me bad, maybe look bad, or all these other things when it could be coming out of pure love and concern for others that person is coming to me. But I would push them away or not maybe receive what they were trying to offer because I have put up this barrier.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
It does. And it makes me, I'm in the same boat, but it makes me sad that these are even things that hit our head minds first, as opposed to somebody just trying to do good for somebody. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It just makes me sad.
And that is the genius of this story because you can layer down, you can teach it on a level that a 5-year-old could teach, and then you could probably spend months, with the sort of the philosophical understanding of each of these characters. And so, hopefully we tapped in it. And what I really hope to do through the sermon this morning is just really kind of get a conversation started, between church members, but also, within ourselves. Right. It's like, who am I of the story and how can I better show love?
Yeah.
How can I do no harm? How can I do good?
Yeah.
And so, that's all for us. And, each one of these parables is the same way. I mean, some of them, I think the first two that I'm doing, and I'll go ahead and say, I'm doing Prodigal Son next week. But I think the first two are pretty easy to understand and get on a base level, but to actually put it into practice just becomes our life's work.
Yeah.
And so, but I am going to get some of those parables that are really like, what was Jesus talking about? Yeah. And we'll try to unpack those as well as we get into the later weeks.
Well, like you said, I think that's the beautiful thing about the parables is, like Shrek and Donkey would always say is like ogres are like layers. These parables are they're like onions. Yeah. They've got layers, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they do, yeah.
And these parables have these layers to it. And I think you did a good job of helping us to kind of see the different layers of putting ourselves into the different characters, positions, and all that stuff. Because I think it's real easy to just gloss over and go, I should have just helped the guy. But you kind of miss a big portion of it by just going straight to that one thing. You know what I mean? And trying to relate because every part can tell part of the story. And if we only consider one thing, we're missing the rest of it, I guess.
Well, and it's real easy to like compartmentalize to say, well, it's only about like helping the homeless guy that's there on the side of the road, right. And not like what is my feelings about the person who's got all the political signs in this yard that are something that I hate and disdain is in a party with that. Am I going to show love, and is he my neighbor? That's the question. Is he my neighbor?
Yep.
And Jesus would say, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so how's that going to affect my behavior towards him?
Yep.
So tough,
good stuff.
Tough stuff. Good stuff.
is.
Tough
It
stuff.
is.
Yeah.
But we are kind of right at that time. So, Dave, you said we're going to Prodigal Son next week. Is there anything else that we need to get ready for?
I can't imagine. Yeah. I mean, it's a prodigal son. I mean, just like keeping an open mind and heart. It is Father's Day, too. Yep. So, I was talking with Juan about it and said, this parable really probably should have been titled, we call it the prodigal son, the prodigal father.
Yeah.
And so, it's just like we're trying to lift up fathers, but it really for all of us, whether we're men or women or whatever, is that we'd have that kind of accepting love and grace for another. But we won't get ahead of ourselves. We'll do that next week.
That's for next week. Yeah. So come join us. The only thing I'd ask is that you guys pray for VBS. We are filming this on a Sunday. VBS starts tomorrow. You probably won't see this till Wednesday, but keep praying that that the Lord works in some big ways. And I think we have over 200 kids that are going to come be a part of this. So
I understand it's the most we've ever had.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot. We have to have a cutoff.
Yeah.
But I think we've had to squeeze in some people after all of that, and so we're ended up with more kids than we've ever had, which is really good.
Fun.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's going to be a great time.
And we have plenty of help. We got lots of volunteers.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. You know where to catch us if you need the comments, or if you have a comment, you can drop them in our Facebook, you can drop them in the YouTube, all that good stuff. And without further ado, we'll catch you next time.
God bless everybody. Have a great week.